In 2020, the United States government returned $308 million to Nigeria, money that had been stolen decades earlier. In 2021, they returned another $23 million. In 2023, another $52 million came back from the island of Jersey. And this keeps happening. Every few years, another chunk of money gets discovered in some offshore account, some shell company, some luxury property halfway across the world. The total amount stolen? Somewhere between $3 billion and $5 billion. Nobody knows the exact number because the money was hidden so well in so many places that investigators are still finding it 25 years later. This is the story of the greatest robbery in African history, a heist so massive, so brazen that it makes movie bank robberies look like petty theft. And the man who pulled it off wasn't a criminal mastermind or an international thief, he was the president of Nigeria. His name was Sani Abacha, and this is how he stole billions while an entire country watched. To understand how someone steals billions from their own country, you need to understand Nigeria in the 1990s. Nigeria is Africa's most populous country, over 200 million people today, about 100 million back then. It's also one of Africa's wealthiest nations, at least on paper. Nigeria has massive oil reserves, one of the largest oil exporters in the world. But most Nigerians were desperately poor. The oil money wasn't reaching regular people, it was disappearing into the pockets of corrupt politicians and military leaders. Sani Abacha was born in 1943 in Kano, northern Nigeria. He joined the military and rose steadily through the ranks. He was involved in multiple military coups, the violent overthrows of government that had become common in Nigeria. Abacha wasn't particularly charismatic, he wasn't a great public speaker, he was quiet, calculating and patient. He watched and waited while other military officers made their moves for power. In November 1993, Abacha made his move. He seized power in a bloodless coup, overthrowing an interim government. He declared himself head of state and commander-in-chief of the armed forces. Abacha promised to restore democracy. He said he would only stay in power temporarily, just long enough to stabilize the country and organize proper elections. He was lying. Abacha had no intention of giving up power, and more importantly, he had no intention of letting the opportunity of a lifetime pass him by. He controlled Nigeria's government, he controlled the military, he controlled access to the country's oil revenues, and he was about to use that control to commit the biggest theft in African history. The system Abacha set up was brilliant in its simplicity. Nigeria's oil money flowed into government accounts. From there, it was supposed to be distributed for public services, infrastructure, healthcare, education. But Abacha had other plans. He created a network of front companies, shell corporations, and fake contracts. Government money would be approved for a project, transferred to one of these companies, and then vanish. The companies existed only on paper. The projects were never built. The money ended up in offshore bank accounts controlled by Abacha and his family. It wasn't subtle. It was happening in plain sight. But who was going to stop him? Abacha controlled the military. He had security forces loyal to him. Anyone who questioned what was happening, anyone who investigated too closely faced arrest, imprisonment, or worse. Journalists who reported on corruption were detained. Political opponents were jailed. Activists were silenced. Abacha created an atmosphere of fear where asking questions about missing money could get you killed. And the money kept flowing out of Nigeria. Abacha didn't work alone. He had help from family members, government officials, and crucially, international banks. His son Mohammed became one of the key figures in moving the stolen money. Mohammed would set up companies, open bank accounts, and facilitate transfers. The Abacha family operated like an organized crime syndicate, except they had the full power of the Nigerian state behind them. The money went everywhere: Swiss banks, British banks, banks in Luxembourg, Liechtenstein, Jersey, accounts in the United States, real estate in London. They didn't just steal cash, they bought properties, luxury goods, businesses, and their international banking system helped them do it. Banks that were supposed to flag suspicious transactions, that were supposed to ask questions about millions of dollars being moved by Nigerian government officials, chose not to look too closely. Why? Because they made money from the deposits and transfers. Abacha's stolen billions were profitable for banks across the world. Back in Nigeria, the country was falling apart. Schools had no funding, hospitals lacked basic supplies, roads were crumbling, power outages were constant, clean water was scarce. And ordinary Nigerians knew exactly what was happening. They could see it with their own eyes. They watched government convoys of luxury vehicles drive past them while they struggled to feed their families. They heard stories about the Abacha family's extravagant shopping trips abroad while their own children couldn't afford school fees. But speaking out was dangerous, deadly even. People whispered in their homes, they made bitter jokes in low voices, they shared stories about the latest government theft. But publicly, most Nigerians stayed silent because they had seen what happened to people who didn't. Life under Abacha meant living with rage you couldn't express, watching your country being robbed blind, and being unable to do anything about it. The frustration was suffocating. Abacha also used the stolen money to maintain his grip on power. He bribed military officers to ensure their loyalty. He paid security forces to crush dissent. He bought off politicians who might oppose him. The stolen billions weren't just about personal wealth, they were about power. As long as Abacha had unlimited money, he could buy loyalty and eliminate threats. But Abacha made enemies, powerful ones. In 1995, he ordered the execution of Ken Saro-Wiwa, an environmental activist who had been speaking out against oil companies and government corruption. The execution sparked international outrage. Nigeria was suspended from the Commonwealth. Sanctions were discussed. Inside Nigeria, people were devastated and terrified. If Abacha could execute someone as prominent as Ken Saro-Wiwa, nobody was safe. Abacha didn't care. He tightened his control even further. He declared he would transition Nigeria to civilian rule, but only if he was elected president. It was a sham. Abacha was planning to rig the election and legitimize his dictatorship. Everything was going according to plan. Abacha had the money, he had the power, he had crushed his opposition. And then, in June 1998, something unexpected happened. June 8, 1998, Sani Abacha died suddenly at his presidential villa in Abuja. The official story was that he died of a heart attack. He was 54 years old. According to government statements, Abacha had complained of chest pains and died shortly after. But almost immediately, rumors started spreading. Because in Nigeria, when a dictator dies suddenly and conveniently, people ask questions. Some reports claimed Abacha died in the company of Indian prostitutes who had been flown in for him. Others suggested he had been poisoned by rivals within the military who wanted him gone. Some believed foreign intelligence services had assassinated him. The truth, nobody knows for certain. The circumstances of his death remain murky and suspicious. What we do know is that Abacha's death changed everything overnight. His grip on power died with him. And when Nigerians heard the news, when they learned that Abacha was dead, something remarkable happened. People poured into the streets, not to mourn, to celebrate. All across Nigeria, people danced. They sang, they hugged strangers. They couldn't believe it was real. The man who had terrorized them for 5 years, the dictator who had crushed every hope for freedom, was gone. Children sang songs in the streets, songs that had been whispered in homes but never dared to be sung publicly. Songs mocking Abacha, songs celebrating his death. Parents who would have normally shushed their children let them sing freely for the first time in years. There were no public memorials, no mourning period, no tears shed except from the Abacha family and those who had profited from his regime. People were literally dancing on the news of his death. Market women ululated, young people celebrated in bars. Even those who were usually careful about expressing political opinions openly rejoiced. The relief was palpable. It was like the whole country had been holding its breath for 5 years and could finally exhale. Some people said it felt like Nigeria had been released from prison. Others described it as waking up from a nightmare. The fear that had hung over the country like a dark cloud began to lift. The military regime quickly fell apart. Within a year, Nigeria transitioned to civilian rule under a new president, Olusegun Obasanjo. And that's when people started asking the obvious question, where's all the money? Obasanjo's government began investigating. They looked at government accounts, traced transfers, followed money trails. What they discovered was staggering. Billions of dollars were missing from Nigeria's treasury. The oil revenues that should have built schools, hospitals, and infrastructure had vanished, and the trail led directly to Abacha and his family. When Nigerians learned the full extent of what Abacha had stolen, the anger was overwhelming. It wasn't just that he had been a dictator. It wasn't just that he had killed people and crushed freedom. He had literally robbed the entire country blind while people starved. The celebration of his death turned into something else. A grim satisfaction that he hadn't lived to enjoy most of the money he stole. A bitter acknowledgement that while he was gone, the damage he'd done would take generations to undo. The new government reached out to international authorities. They contacted banks in Switzerland, the UK, the US, and other countries. They provided evidence of the theft. They demanded the money be frozen and returned. And slowly, reluctantly, the international banking system started cooperating. Accounts were frozen, assets were seized. The Abacha family fought back with lawyers, but the evidence was overwhelming. In 1999, Swiss authorities froze $700 million in Abacha-linked accounts. It was just the beginning. More accounts were discovered, more money was found. The scale of the theft became clearer with each new discovery. Abacha hadn't just stolen from Nigeria. He had systematically looted the country for 5 years, siphoning off billions while his people suffered. But recovering the money, that would prove to be almost as complicated as the theft itself. Here's the thing about recovering stolen money hidden in international banks. It's incredibly slow and difficult. Each country has its own laws. Each bank has its own procedures. The Abacha family hired expensive lawyers to fight every seizure. They claimed the money was legitimate. They dragged out legal proceedings for years. And back in Nigeria, people watched with frustration as the recovery process dragged on. Nigerians wanted to see justice. They wanted the Abacha family prosecuted and jailed. They wanted every stolen dollar back. But the legal system moved slowly. International cooperation was complicated, and corruption in Nigeria meant that even recovered money didn't always reach the people who needed it. There was bitter irony in the situation. Money that was supposed to help Nigerians in the 1990s was being recovered in the 2000s, 2010s, and 2020s. A generation had been robbed of opportunities while lawyers argued in courts halfway around the world. Switzerland returned about $700 million in the early 2000s. Then more money was found in other Swiss accounts. The UK found money, Luxembourg found money, Jersey found money, the United States found money in accounts across multiple states. But here's where it gets frustrating. The recovered money often didn't make it back to Nigeria quickly. Legal battles could take years, and when money was finally returned, there were questions about whether it would be used properly or just stolen again by new corrupt officials. Nigerians made dark jokes about the Abacha loot. They said it was the gift that kept on giving, the money that would never stop being found. Every few years, another announcement, we've recovered more Abacha money, and people would laugh bitterly and wonder if they'd ever see any benefit from it. In 2020, the United States returned $308 million that had been recovered from accounts linked to Abacha. In 2021, another $23 million came back from Jersey. In 2023, another $52 million was returned. Each time money came back, Nigerians reacted with a mixture of satisfaction and frustration. Satisfaction that the money was being found, frustration that it was taking so long, anger that Abacha had died before facing real justice. And investigators say there's still more out there, money hidden in accounts they haven't found yet, properties owned through shell companies that are still being traced. The exact total may never be known. Current estimates put the stolen amount somewhere between $3 billion and $5 billion. Of that, about $1.5 billion has been recovered so far, which means billions are still missing. The Abacha family continues to fight. Mohammed Abacha and other family members have faced charges in Nigeria, but they've avoided serious jail time. They claim they did nothing wrong, that the money was earned legitimately. Nobody believes them, especially not ordinary Nigerians who lived through those years and remember what it was like. The international banks that helped Abacha hide his money, most faced no real consequences. They paid some fines, issued apologies, promised to do better. But the system that allowed Abacha to hide billions is still largely intact. And Nigeria, the country, is still dealing with the aftermath of Abacha's rule. The years he was in power represent a massive lost opportunity. Billions that could have transformed the country disappeared. Schools that could have been built weren't. Hospitals that could have saved lives were never funded. Infrastructure that could have modernized the economy was never developed. Talk to any Nigerian who was an adult in the 1990s, and they'll tell you stories about the Abacha years. The fear, the anger, the relief when he died, the frustration at watching the country being robbed, the dark humor that was the only way to cope with the absurdity of it all. Abacha died 26 years ago, but the heist continues. Money is still being found, legal battles are still being fought, and Nigerian officials are still trying to track down every last dollar. It's the heist that never ends, because when you steal billions and hide it well enough, recovering it can take decades. Sani Abacha ruled Nigeria for 5 years. In that time, he stole somewhere between $3 and $5 billion from his own country. That's not money stolen from a bank vault. It's not money taken from some corporation. It's money that belonged to Nigerian people. Oil revenues that should have built their country, educated their children, provided healthcare, created opportunities. Abacha died suddenly in 1998, but his theft continues to impact Nigeria today. The money stolen a quarter century ago is still being recovered. And every time another account is found, every time another few $1 million comes back, it's a reminder of what was taken. The saddest part? Abacha wasn't unique. He was just the most successful. Corruption in Nigeria didn't start with him and didn't end with him. He just did it better, stole more, hid it more effectively. And the international banking system that enabled him is still there, still helping corrupt officials hide stolen money, still making it possible for people in power to rob their countries blind. Sani Abacha's loot is Nigeria's greatest heist, and 26 years later, it still hasn't ended. What are your thoughts on the Abacha loot? Should international banks face harsher penalties? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more stories like this. See you in the next one.